I think most people, most of our society lives in such a way that we believe we'll never die until we're really faced with something kind of catastrophic in our lives that makes us realize that that is the one thing that no one will ever be able to change, or at least that we can foresee in the near future, that death is inevitable.
By talking about it and telling other people of what we believe in sometimes is much more, or should be much more desirable than not to talk about it. And I feel like, doing this and talking about how tribes of from different parts of the country deal with death, to have more people understand it, whether it's healthcare providers especially, or mental health providers, to understand it is so critical.
And the significance of these various rituals, sort of funerary ceremonies, they are very important to a society, because basically they are part of that fabric in which they keep the society intact.
We are not afraid of death. Death for us is the complement or the other side of life. The Aztec people view everything in dualities, in masculine and feminine. And so life and death are a duality that exists together. There is life so that there might be death, and there is death so that there might be life.
What I have learned is that the way in which we treat our bodies all of our lives does affect, ultimately, how we leave this world most of the time. So, for example, if I choose to smoke, I potentially will face the problems of smoking further down the road, such as an increased risk for heart disease, or perhaps having to struggle with lung disease, which can affect the way in which I leave this world.
That's the law of karma, that you sow what you reap, basically. And people die, and I've seen it again and again since I attend dying people. People die pretty much the way they live. It's a joke among Buddhists that if you have a lot of car troubles, you beat your horse in some former lifetime.
Bad actions have bad life. We take up a new body, and the bad actions have a bad result, and we take up the lesser being than the human being, or maybe an evil person in next life. So actions have to be performed perfectly. A person needs to be righteous. Through the meditation, through the yoga, and through austerity, through fasting, and cleansing the body, mind, and soul, the righteous person is able to balance the physical, emotional, and spiritual life, and that disciplines the person to condition his or her body in a fashion that they can die effortlessly.
How the person behaves and lives his life helps to guide him when he makes his journey, his or her journey to the spirit world. We're given guidelines, values like humility, generosity, bravery, courage, and how you treat other people throughout your life. But the spirits, the creator, the Chankashlas, they're very forgiving. So, and they understand that we're human and we make mistakes. So we all know we're going to make mistakes throughout our life, but we want to live the best way you can. You want to walk on this earth and do good. Live well, take care of your earth robe, be generous to people, help those in need.
A lot of the old folks say that, I guess, what you do in this earth, on this earth, will affect your journey to the spirit world. That's one of the reasons why they always say live with a good heart, treat your relatives respectfully, and try and lead a good life.
We need to educate ourselves. We have to learn patience and long-term vision so that we can sometimes resist our short-term urges and desires, which in our belief are the source of most evil in this world. People do things to harm me, and so I do something to harm them. We react instead of having a long-range goal for making the world a better place.
There is a Jewish view that we are actually going to be judged. It says that those who try to lead a good life will be rewarded in the world to come. What I think is fascinating is the phrasing of that. Those who tried to lead a good life. None of us is perfect. We're all human. But we do the absolute best we can to be co-workers with God in the work of creation. We're a value called tikkun olam, world repair. So every day we try to serve God in every way, with everything that we do, to make the world a better place. If you think about the life of Mozart or the legacy of Martin Luther King, they're no longer with us, but their legacy of a love of music or a dream of a racially tolerant society live on with us today, even if they're not physically present.
As a scientist, if you're buried and one day you may become a fossil, and another anthropologist may actually be able to find you and be able to study it.
In the Lakota belief, we believe that the individual makes a journey to the spirit world. And the spirit world is in the Star Nation with the Milky Way.
God created us from the clay of this earth, from the dust of this earth, and breathed the spirit into us. And so when we die, our bodies go back into the earth, and our spirit goes back to God. There are some specific beliefs that are maybe unique to Islam, which is that, first of all, an angel comes to take the spirit out of the body. If the person has been a good person, that will be very gentle and very peaceful. And if the person has been evil, it will be rough and difficult for that soul to leave the body. The soul will cling to the body, and then it will be taken to heaven.
According to Jewish tradition, when you die, the body remains here, and the soul goes on to another place. The body we take care of with the utmost respect because of the Hebrew value of kavod hamet, respect for the dead. Therefore, we have someone in the room who is a shomer, someone who is a guard to make sure that the body is taken care of. We believe that the body is created, b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and thus we are respectful to it. The soul, after death, though, moves on to another place.
Spiritually, the Navajo believes that when an individual is dying, there's going to be a good and a bad spirit that's going to be leaving the deceased body. Once the person has died, you no longer speak of that person. And the people who have buried the deceased were not allowed to intermingle with the living until the specified time period, which could be anywhere from 4 days to 9 days. And the whole purpose is that that a person who has died, the spirit, the bad spirit, may have entered or caught on to the living, and people who have been among the deceased person may come back and infect the rest of the family.
Well, my earliest recollection of what happens to folks when they die is that our spirit lives on. And when I say my earliest recollection about that is because I could remember my great-grandmother talking about spirits that had passed on before that were still present. I grew up always having a sense that when I die or when somebody I cared about died, that they were always present. Their spirit was always present. And there was always this strong sense that that our prayers were offered, to help them cross over to the other side.
The old folks talk about the pain the pain of birth and then the pain of going into the birth of, or the rebirth of the spirit world. So you experience the pain coming into this world, and then you experience pain going out of this world. So there's that balance.
I would say, first of all, no one knows precisely what happens when you die. But certainly the Christian tradition believes that the person survives, in a sense. The body and spirit, or soul, if you like, separate. That's what death is, in a sense. But we're not quite sure what happens. We believe that, again, the personality persists. I don't know if personality is quite the word for it, because personality involves smiling and all that sort of stuff. The body is no longer present. But there is a persistence of the individual personhood. And then, kind of varies by tradition, Christian tradition, precisely what happens. Certainly, ultimately, we would believe that you either go to heaven here with God in a wonderful way that we don't really know what it's about. Scripture says, "Eye has not seen, ear has not heard what God has prepared for those who love Him." Or you might go to the other place if you've been, I suppose, bad.
When a person dies, from the point of view of Buddhist tradition, that moment of death is very important. It is considered not an end, but a transition. And how one prepares for that transition and how one accomplishes that change and shift is a key factor in one's life. We experience little deaths every day, every moment. Our thoughts rise up, dwell, and pass. Our breath comes in and goes out. So we have births and deaths and transitions constantly. And how we work with transition in our own life is preparation for death. It actually is considered to be the same thing. But the moment of death is an opportunity to drop all of that and actually attain enlightenment. The true nature of mind is revealed at that moment when the elements have dissolved and the body has fallen away.
When a person dies, his or her soul goes to another body. And Lord Krishna says, as we discard our worn out and unusable clothes and put on the new one, same way the Atman, the soul, when finds out that the body is unusable, takes up on the new one. So you have to take up a lot of bodies until you really achieve that state of mind, transcend the world around you.
Our beliefs are that there is a place, Mictlán, who is watched over by Mictlán Tecutli, Mictlán Siwat. It is one of the places, it is sort of the spirit world, one of the spirit worlds, where people go when they pass on into the spirit world. What we do know about people when they die is that this body that we have came from our Mother Earth. She provided all the nourishment and everything that we needed for us to be able to have this body. As we feed it food, plants, animals, whatever we eat, all of that comes from the earth. So in a sense, that's where this body, our bodies, come from. And our body will return to our Mother Earth. And she will take that body and she will recycle it. And as she recycles it, it gives new life to the plants that will be eaten by the animals, that perhaps eventually will be eaten by other humans. So in some sense, we always live. We have always lived and we will always live.
We pray for them, in the Catholic Christian tradition in particular. Again, that notion of purgatory, that notion that our prayers might be helpful to them in that process. Again, put this in quotes, outside time and space. These people are dead and living in another dimension that we don't know about. But we do pray for them, and we also can ask them to pray for us. We think that their prayers can be valuable to us as well. So there's that kind of honoring, kind of family honoring. Every year in the Catholic Christian tradition, we have All Saints' Day. Other groups have this as well. And it's November 1st. And on that day, we honor all those who have died.
I honor the dead and those that have gone before us in the way that has been celebrated for the last 3,000 years. And in my culture, it's called the Day of the Dead. When you're dealing with earth-based cultures such as the Mexican culture, death is very prevalent to them. It's always on their shoulder. So they learn to live with it a lot easier than Western cultures do, so it doesn't become as scary or as hard. So part of the honoring is you see skeletons, you see the use of animals, animal skeletons, and primarily people skeletons.
To honor our dead and those who have gone to the spirit world, one of the things we do is traditionally we cut our hair. We take our hair and we place that hair with the person who's making his journey, or his or her journey. That way it also lets people know that we are in mourning, that we've lost someone. We serve a meal throughout our culture and our rituals and beliefs. Food is very important, as is music. And so we feed, you feed people. Today, the same thing. When we have our wakes, where we stay awake and comfort the family, everybody brings food to help to feed the people. So that's one of the ways that we honor and remember those who've made their journey. We also, during a year after, for that first year after they made that journey, we remember them. Remember all the things that they were known for, whether they were a singer, a warrior, a dancer, storyteller, maker of beadwork or quill work, whatever their role was, we remember them. And then 1 year following, we do a memorial. And we again gather the family and friends, and we feed people again, and we have a giveaway. With our culture, one of our ceremonies is giveaway. So during that year, you also make things. And then when it's time for their memorial, you give those gifts out, and you give those things out to honor and remember.
And I remember, my grandmother sang, and others, that you didn't do anything. You didn't make decisions. You didn't travel, because if you started to travel, my grandma used to say, then you'd be wandering forever. After a year had gone by, then you had a memorial for that person, and basically that memorial honored that person's life. You had, in our case, we had a service, and then a big meal, and you had a giveaway. And throughout the whole year, you're preparing for this giveaway. You're buying things, you're putting things away, you're having star quilts made, whatever it is, And then you have the feast, and then you give gifts away. You give all of this away, and that signifies the end of that mourning period.
We keep the memory of that individual alive in our hearts, in our minds. A year after their passing, we had a memorial dinner for each one of them, and hope that in our prayers that they had a good journey, and that they're with our relatives over on the other side.
Like the Sioux Indian people, like a lot of times when they are like having a ceremony, they feed the spirit of their deceased or ancestors. We don't. We better not ever do anything like that. That's such a negative action. So like a lot of times that there's a gathering and there are Navajo people in the midst of it, and they're only pretty much traditional. Something like that is going on, and it's just like, it really turns them off. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just like, because that's not what we believe in.
At the funeral, the highlight is this chesped, this eulogy, whereby a rabbi or loved one will talk about the life. And then immediately after the funeral, we have this entire process of mourning, which I'd like to go into now, about reintegration. We come back from the funeral, and what's the first thing we do? We eat. We have su'udat havra'ah. And the first thing that we traditionally eat is a boiled egg. Why an egg? Because it's a sign of life. And we eat, even at a time when you're not hungry. Jewish tradition says we want you to get back on the path of life. We do that, and then begins a 7-day period of mourning called the Shiva period. During that time, we sit on low stools. We don't go to work. We don't shave. Our mirrors are covered, and people come to visit us. And we say a memorial prayer called the Kaddish several times a day with a minyan, a mourner's minyan, of 10 Jewish men, according to Jewish tradition, over the age of 13, or in liberal Judaism, 10 Jewish adults over the age of 13. And we comfort the mourner. We come in and we ask about the deceased. We tell stories about him. And in doing this, we evoke the memory so that the words of Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may the remembrance of the righteous be for a blessing, are heard. Following the 7-day period is the 30-day period. Someone might return to work, but they won't go to parties. They'll still go to synagogue and recite the Kaddish prayer. And after the 30 days, there's the entire year time of mourning, whereby we reflect on our loved one and go and say this memorial prayer. At the end of the year, we light a 24-hour candle called a Yahrzeit candle, from the words Yahrzeit, year time, remembering our loved one. And then we go back to the grave and we dedicate the tombstone. And it works a little bit like the guardrails on the highway. You know, in the past they were designed to stop you. The new ones are designed to get you back on the path of life. And that's what the Jewish rituals for reintegration do so well.
Normally at the graveyard they would plant a tree. And these are called tree of life, basically. The very specific trees would be found and would be planted. And that tree would actually be allowed to grow, and nobody's allowed to cut it down. So that sort of symbolizes that life of that particular individual sort of continues. A child born in that particular family would actually bear the name of the deceased. So that name would continue to get carried on. And in fact, the process is also very, very elaborate, because the naming ceremony for that particular individual then would also involve visiting the graveyard. And basically people, the person, the elderly person in the family would have to be sort of communicating, supposedly communicating with the spirit of this particular individual, and saying that we are going to be honoring you now by actually naming this child as your namesake. And would you accept that?
I think to honor and remember the dead is one of our biggest, I don't want to say our biggest jobs, but I think it's a really important thing for us to do for people who have died. For example, my children have never known my father, so it's very important for them to know about him. He was their grandfather, whether he's alive or whether he's dead. So I think the importance of passing down stories, the importance of going through pictures, the importance of talking about history and what his importance was to me, I think that's our job for the people that are alive, are to pass down their ancestry. And you can really only do that through photos and objects and storytelling and memories. So I think that that's a very important thing to do, is to memorialize people that have died. If somebody gets so much pressure to not carry their loved one along with them, or they think that's the best way to handle their grief and their ongoing bereavement, I think it takes a lot of energy, emotional energy, to keep all those feelings kind of pushed down without having an outlet for those feelings.
For myself, I've always felt blessed, if you will, at the way that my culture, that my family, that our community handled death and dying. I think in our society today, we don't look at that and we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to talk about it, you know. We're not forthright with our children. We keep things from them, and we tell them that if, for example, a person has died, that they're just gone away and those kinds of things. I feel very fortunate to have had the experience that I have, because yes, it has been influenced by Christianity, but I think that it made it even more stronger. The foundation that I was given to handle death and dying.
Life is about preparing for the last moment. Life is about preparation for death, so that when that moment comes, so it will come to each of us, we can embrace it not as something that leads nowhere, but as something that leads to a new and wonderful phase of life.
Anything could happen to me at any time. That sometimes the rug is just pulled out from under people. I mean, we're meant to die as soon as we're conceived. So there's no guarantee that I'm going to live until I'm 90 or I'm 100 or live a good long life. That is conventional's wisdom way of looking at life. But I think when you're a bereavement professional, you realize life could end at any time. And so I've really learned to not sweat the small stuff, that I try to be kinder to people, realize that we're all connected to one another in some way, and try desperately not to get as impatient over little things, traffic, too many advertisements on TV. I mean, who cares?
Despite the changes for Indigenous people on this hemisphere, our old beliefs, our rituals, our prayers, our ceremonies have always been very important to us, and they sustain us. They help us to remember that there's a harmony with which we must live here on the earth with other people and in relation to death. And in this harmony, our rituals provide us a way to continue to live in a very modern world, but still holding on to very old ways. And so these are not forgotten, they're not lost, and they're very much a part of who we are today in many of the Indigenous communities across this hemisphere.
To always remember that you have a culture and a language. Like my grandmother said, you have a culture and a language, and those gifts were given to us by the Creator, and don't let them go to sleep. Always keep them strong, cherish them, cherish each other.
If there's one thing patients and families have taught me, is to remember that every day is a gift, and that saying important things to the people that are of meaning to us in our lives is of critical importance, and we shouldn't wait until the last week of our life, but in fact try and share the joy of life with those around us every day.
Tlatzoka maweweteyot initlatlamoelinka. Cantemos con alegría que al cielo le está gustando. Cantemos con alegría que al cielo le está gustando.